Hello and welcome to Patched. I'm your host Paul James, and today I'm joined by two very special guests. We've kicked out Damo and Matto. They're shit. We don't want them anymore. Chris Button, Stephen Del Prado, both of Player 2 fame. Welcome aboard.
Howdy, howdy.
Thank you for having me.
No worries. We're here because it's a very special week for nerds, especially if you were kind of brought up somewhere near the 90s. Final Fantasy VII Remake is available now in Australia. The rest of the world, I don't know, enjoy the reviews for a little bit longer and you can play it later in the week. Sucked in. So, Stephen, you've done the review for the site. I've done a Player 2 plays for the site, so I really contributed. And Chris, you're coming at Final Fantasy as someone who doesn't necessarily know the game overly well. So we've kind of put together a really good combination of people here to really thrash this Final Fantasy VII Remake conversation out, I think. So, Stephen, we better kick off with you because you've got the review up on the site. Give us a brief little synopsis of your review before we ultimately route everyone over towards the site to go check it out.
Final Fantasy VII Remake is a stellar reimagining of the original game, but it is not without faults.
Well, and discuss a little bit, just surface level, because we will ultimately deal with some of that later.
Oh, as just in general, like overall, or some of the issues that I had?
Yeah, go a little top level with some of those faults, and then we'll kind of thrash a few of these things out as a group shortly.
Okay, I think the hardest thing about reviewing this game is that you're torn between coming at it from an angle of someone who is a huge fan of the original and had that very formative experience of it as my first JRPG ever living in Australia, and Square never bringing that stuff over to Australia generally. But also trying to think about those people who are coming into this with absolutely zero nostalgia for the game to trade off. And believe me when I say that this thing is dripping with nostalgia bait. It feels really manipulative in some situations, completely on purpose. And I'm not going to lie and say it doesn't work, because it absolutely works. But at the same time,
through it.
I can see through it. I can feel the strings being pulled, and it's kind of hard to give it a free pass on that, considering there's probably a sizable portion of the audience who are coming to this with none of those elements working for them.
That's fair. Well, Chris, you're one of those people that are coming at this thing without a great deal of experience. So how much time have you put into the game so far?
Yeah, so for the remake, I'm going to say roughly around 5 hours. So I'm multiple chapters in. I'm into, what is it, Sector 7 or whatever?
Oh, you're in the slums.
Yeah, so where things start to sort of open up, and you're given some of the side quests and that sort of thing. But yeah, I've barely touched the original, so I will admit I am a sucker for hype. So I was certainly very interested to see what all the fuss was about, the remake of Final Fantasy VII. And I think, admittedly, a lot of these characters, there's a little bit of familiarity because I did play a bunch of the early Kingdom Hearts games where some of those characters were sort of there on the periphery. So I sort of recognize some of these characters and that sort of thing, but I don't necessarily have some of those big connections. So I'm very intrigued as to what Stephen says about some of this alleged nostalgia bait, to see whether it's something that I'm still able to identify or whether it'll just go whoosh straight over my head.
Well, let's start with some of that story aspect, because that's where we can kind of address some of those points as well. What have the both of you made of the narrative? Now, obviously, Stephen, you're able to talk to it in a far greater level than either of us, because even in my experience, I'm only up to Chapter 7 as of the time that we are recording this. Sorry, Chapter 8, I should say, as of the time we're recording this. And Chris, obviously, you're not quite that far either. And Stephen, you're not going to spoil the ending here, because apparently that's something else. But what are we kind of making of that narrative so far? And yeah, Stephen, you and I can talk about it through the lens of existing fans, and kind of we knew what the narrative was beforehand, but there's obviously little twists and turns and changes in there. What are we thinking of it so far?
It's 90. Oh, I don't know. That's maybe a big call. 90% is maybe a little bit too much. It hits all the key beats, and when it doesn't, it does so for a reason. You gentlemen have probably run into a few hints that things aren't quite going down the same path as the original, whether you realize it or not.
Oh,
And
yeah,
a lot
for
of
sure.
that will coalesce. A lot of that is going to coalesce in the last couple of chapters, and it seems to steadily increase, which is where I take issue with them calling this remake. I think that's a little bit of a sketchy
It's
word to
marketing.
throw onto the end of it. Well, the fact that the box doesn't say it's only part one is also mark. So I'm sure
Yeah,
Square Enix are
dodgy
going to cop
fuckers.
plenty of flack for that. I honestly can't be asked with it at the moment, but it's generally the Final Fantasy VII that you remember.
And I guess that's enough for them to be able to say, yeah, it's a remake. That's it. We're good. It's Final Fantasy VII as you remember it. Boom, just get it out the door.
I mean, more or less, pretty much. They've done a lot of work to expand elements that were sort of implied in the original. And again, people probably forget that the original didn't necessarily have the greatest translation into English.
Yeah.
So I don't wonder if some of the, things we took for subtlety in the original or lack thereof were more to do with the translation letting us down a little bit. So I think with another 23 years or so under their belt to really refine what they wanted that story to be, of course, go back and add in things that they couldn't do at the time due to technological constraints, but also just make the world a little bit richer. And I don't just mean visually. You're given more time between certain characters so that relationships can develop, and characters that were like very loosely sketched in the original are now fully formed here. We're talking about like Biggs and Wedge and Jesse,
Yeah.
who now feel like they have meaningful roles in the overall narrative and aren't just bit players relegated to the opening sequence.
You sure? I just think Jesse's trying to hit on me at every occasion.
It is doing that awkward trope of every female character falling over themselves for Cloud, which I don't know
Yeah.
that I particularly dig, and they are doing some really heavy lifting in the early Aerith scenes to bash you over the head with, this is the girl you're supposed to like, this is the love interest.
And it 100% doesn't end badly. We think. Chris, what about you? As someone coming at it, relatively blindly, for the most part, what are you noticing so far?
Yeah, well, it's interesting because I think if there were a gaming Bible, I think Final Fantasy VII would have its own book because of how heavily ingrained its sort of mythos is in sort of wider sort of gaming circles and that sort of thing. So I've got the loose understanding of, okay, there's a group of people who are labeled eco-terrorists. There's this woman that potentially something bad happens to who's named Aerith. Is that a translation? Now tell me, is that a translation thing, or did people get her name wrong for such a long time? What's the go there?
I believe that was a translation thing because it would be really easy to go with Aerith instead of Aerith when you're translating that particular name.
So
okay.
Is she actually Aerith or Aerith then?
I'm going to go with Aerith, given that this is, what they've gone with. Again, it could be just some meta weirdness that they're playing with in terms of the character name. But my take is that they always intended it to be Aerith, and it was just something lost in translation.
That they can now correct.
Yep.
Interesting. Yeah, because I know a lot of that sort of surface level stuff, but a lot of the parts in between I know next to nothing about. But I think early on I've been absolutely blown away with the sheer production value of everything, and I think Square Enix are just flexing at this point with what their visuals department are capable of doing. So I think I've certainly been sucked in by all the pretty pictures and the pretty lights, and I do like a lot of the characters that I've met early on. In fact, I have taken quite a shine to the leader of this group, Barrett.
Oh, Barrett.
Barrett. I find him quite charming. This big rough exterior, but he's really a big softy on the inside. So I've been quite enamored with Barrett. And coming to the slums, and there's what's her face, Tifa,
Yep.
who was a bit of a fan favorite, I'm led to believe, and I think she's quite a charming character and that sort of thing. So I'm liking a lot of those characters and some of those sort of early story beats, and just from what I've played, from the opening section in Midgar, where you are attempting to sabotage this reactor, and it sort of seems like your individual impact as this sort of eco group is largely overstated due to other influences at play. So I'm very intrigued to see what's going on there.
Which is actually really interesting because, and I think you and I are about to say the same thing there, Stephen, but like the original game, Shinra had nothing, well, at least what the player saw, they had nothing to do with the explosion. Like, it went off and it is what it is. And so we're not spoiling too much here for anyone who's not gone out and played it yet, because
you would literally get this out of the demo,
and it's the first 30 minutes or so of the game. But well, unless you're really, really slow when you're trying to get out of there. But it's like Shinra has nothing to do with it. It's actually really quite interesting that it becomes overblown and that Avalanche didn't have nearly the influence over the initial explosion, because that was my impression the whole time. Like, they blew it up, that's it was done, and it was all them. And it turns out it wasn't. And then it kind of spawns this, I did all this damage and blah 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 blah, and actually you made a little dent in the chink in the armor, but they actually finished the job to make you look really far worse. It's kind of interesting how that's, and again, I'm not done yet, but how that will develop from there. And does that come out? Do they eventually discover that actually everything was quite overblown? I don't know. Stephen, shut up. That's what.
Well, that shift serves a few purposes, and I think it does so very well. One, it sets Shinra up as a truly evil corporation, more so than it did in the original.
Yeah.
And I think it humanizes Avalanche a little bit more to be this sort of well-meaning but ultimately ineffective eco-terrorism group, so that then any significant damage can't be attributed to them.
Yeah. Okay.
So it sort of does a better job of absolving them of wider harm.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I think it also is tying into that overarching narrative that was touched upon in the original release, that is the war between Midgar and Wutai, but something that obviously is going to play a much bigger role in this
Part 2, 3, 4,
version.
whatever it is. Yeah. Can we just get it out of the way? Can we just put Crisis Core in here somehow, please?
I mean, you can do whatever you want, Paul. It's your show.
Okay, cool. Let's do it. I've been begging him for it for years. Let's just do it. All right. So the combat, which is something that we don't have to worry too much about spoilers for. That's for sure. It certainly seems to be a point of division. Just in the, we started recording this shortly after the embargo lifted tonight, and Stephen, your review went up, and then there was other sites and YouTubers and whatnot starting to put their reviews up as well. And the combat has been a big point of difference in a few cases. And it seems like, from what I can gather, all three of us might actually be on the same page, though. So we're not divided at all. Thoughts on the combat?
It's okay.
That's the box quote right there.
That's not going to get us on any boxes. Come on, mate. Sharpen it up.
It has issues. It improves upon its forebears in that it's drawing heavily from Kingdom Hearts 3 and Final Fantasy 15.
Yep.
And I appreciate some of the things they're doing in there. There is a large emphasis on manually controlling each character, because the party AI, as I said in my review, is freaking useless. And if you are not directing them to do things, they will stand in the AoE attacks. They will not heal properly. They won't use the right combination of attacks at particular moments. You need to tell them what to do. They are blithering idiots running around the battlefield, spamming regular attacks. Otherwise, generally.
It almost makes the classic mode feel justified in some ways.
Well, the interesting thing about classic mode is it defaults to the easy difficulty level.
Yeah.
Whereas I played through on normal.
Yeah.
Which, again, it really emphasizes those enemy weaknesses. So there are some boss battles where if you are not targeting that enemy with its weakness, or basically following what the steps the assess materia reveals to you are required, you're going to be bashing your head against a brick wall for 40 minutes.
Which is not ideal, and that's if you even survive it, at which point you maybe have to restart from scratch. And
It
come
does
in with
do
the
that.
right materia and all that sort of thing.
Absolutely. Like, preparation is essential, and I think that's why they don't allow you to have hard mode until you've completed the game, because you would be walking into so many of those fights with the incorrect materia set up and just having to and reload the prior save, stack your materia correctly for that individual boss battle, and then give it a go.
Yeah, that's
Normal,
fair.
you can generally scrape by, but it's a war of attrition. Easy is not what I'd recommend if you're going to play this. If you're going to play it easy, probably just do the classic mode, because I tested out a few battles on easy and it's not challenging. Like, in easy mode, you don't really need to switch to the other characters, because what they're doing is still effective, unlike normal mode.
Yeah. Yeah, okay, I follow. Chris, what about you? So you're obviously much earlier in the whole process there, but I think you've probably by this point, if you're in, what'd you say, you're in chapter 3, you've probably got a little bit of a snapshot now of how it works and how it all comes together.
Yeah, so I've started doing some of the side quests where, at least from my perspective, some of the battles and some of the enemies are starting to become a bit more varied, and testing you out with some of these additional materia and using assess and that sort of stuff, like as Stephen has said. But even just taking a step back to the difficulty options. I found that really off-putting at the start in terms of how it was broken up into normal, easy, and classic. Oh, but classic's defaulting to easy, because I was sort of, I would have appreciated perhaps some middle ground where I can play, or I've been playing on normal, so playing, I suppose what the game
The way it's intended to be played, yeah.
Yeah, states sort of the core experience is for that mix of battle and story. But then I would like to try classic, but I don't want to be playing on something that's going to be too easy or whatever. So I'd like something that's sort of a little bit in between. But at this early stage, the combat hasn't quite clicked with me. I do find the sort of the real time action based sort of combat, broken up with the sort of slow motion tactical combat side of things, where you will do an ability or a spell, or switch to the other character, use an ability, and then switch back and resume sort of the real-time battle. I find that interesting and potentially an engaging concept, but I have come across some of those battles where I feel like I've got the right outfit or the right materia set up, and feel like I've got the right elements and that sort of thing. But I've still found some of the battles to be quite difficult early on, or feeling some of them a little bit spongy in terms of the numbers sort of going down, but their health bars still sort of pretty static. But again, that could just be a simple case of me needing to get good.
I mean, it took me a little while to get my head around, because I'm like, okay, I'm using the right material. Why is this not necessarily kicking in? But I think it's so much it boils down to, in a bit like, I guess, one of the parallels, Stephen, you and I discussed this well before the review even went live. Final Fantasy XIII with the stagger bar. Using which, geez, I might upset a few people if I start drawing comparisons between Final Fantasy VII and 13. But
I did in my review. Go for it.
Yeah, so sink the boots into Stephen. These Twitter handles below him on the screen right now. I mean, the stagger bar was one of the, personally, as far as I'm concerned, one of the really cool things about Final Fantasy 13. In fact, the combat was probably the best part of the whole game. But I don't know, they're just not quite. The balancing act's just not quite right when it comes to that combat. They want you to stagger, but then it takes you a little bit too long to actually stagger them. At which point you've been beaten up on a little bit. Your ATB bar's empty, so you can't even heal yourself up. So all of a sudden you're losing that momentum that you were building up, and it kind of has this weird knock-on effect. I feel like all the systems in place are right, but they're just asking a smidge too much of you, or asking you to wail on this enemy or whatever for just a little bit too long before you can really lay the smack on them, before you break them, stagger them, and then you can finally finish them off, potentially.
There are a few issues that tie into that, and I think it speaks to, Chris, you wondering why Classic defaults to easy. I think they know that the battles take too long, and because Classic mode, I should say, is already inherently a slower experience, I cannot imagine how long it would take to get through some of these battles on that classic mode combined with normal or hard difficulty, considering you can't use items hard difficulty.
You can't use items in hard.
No. And one of the things I would say about this game is that, oh my god, a JRPG where I feel like using items is essential and I'm encouraged to do it. It's been since, Rogue Galaxy since I've played a JRPG that did that.
Yeah, you've been able to find ways around it fairly regularly in the more modern stuff.
So, in terms of the combat, and I mentioned this in my review, some of the issues I have are pretty much down to the animations, in that it's really easy for you to be interrupted by an enemy attack, but if an enemy's about to attack you, hitting the guard button is not going to start you guarding right away, because it's not going to cancel out any previous actions that you've input. And some of these enemies attack pretty damn quickly. Yeah. So I think 100%. It's this difficulty that you're managing, in that you want to go all out and try to smash that stagger bar as quickly as you can, but you also need to hold back in case you've done one too many attacks, you can't hit your dodge or your guard, and their attacks get through because you're halfway through an animation.
But I mean, even that aspect would be okay if, and this links back to your point before about, and let's just use Tifa and Barrett for the sake of it, because for Chris and I, that's still our party at the moment. If they were smarter, if the AI was better, if they responded to things better, then that's probably okay. If you bite off a little bit more than you can chew and you get whacked for it, that's all right, because you've got teammates there that are supporting you. But if they're not, or if they're just kind of getting in the way, or they're not healing you when they've got an opportunity, then all of a sudden it really undermines the whole thing.
Again, I think that's supposed to be a feature, not a bug. I think they want you to be really rapidly switching between characters, firing off attacks, using that tactical bar, getting to the point where you're using the L1 command to rapidly fire off those attacks. So you're quickly switching the character, L1 circle, switch to the next character, L1, X, whatever. They want it to feel really rapid and overwhelming, but I don't know if I'm completely down with that.
It's almost like they're trying to turn a traditional JRPG, and in the eyes of some, they're wrong, the best traditional turn-based JRPG, and they're taking the polar opposite direction. Maybe, and it's okay to do something different, of course, but they may be going too far one way. Like, they're trying to turn this unrelenting experience, and I don't know, that doesn't speak to me nearly as much anyway as the traditional thing, or even some middle ground, which is where, say, a Final Fantasy 15 did fit and exist, and it wasn't forcing you to toggle between characters all the time. They were a little bit smarter. That was fine. So
yeah, well, I was actually about to mention Final Fantasy 15, because that is actually one of the very few that I have spent a little bit of time with, and I did find that combat, at least at the beginning, much easier to pick up, and I found that more accessible, and I still found plenty of challenging fights along the way, but it just it's been a while since I've played it, so my memory is a little hazy, but I do just remember it just being very, very responsive, very, very quick and breezy, and easy to pick up. And then while you and Stephen are talking about Galaxy Brain, Final Fantasy VII Remake combat animations here, I'm over here sort of wondering, why can't I use items unless I have an ATB bar to use? For me, that was actually a bit of a rude shock, because perhaps
it's still a shock to me even this far into the game.
Yeah, that was a real rude shock to me, and I was like, what? Are you telling me I can't heal unless I actually get in there, build up some ATB, and use an ATB bar to use an item?
You got to put yourself at risk to be able to heal yourself.
Or how many times did you find yourself running to the fringes of the arena
to hide
because you couldn't do anything? And another reason why I ended up having healing materia on every single character in my party.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense.
I'm glad I'm not the only one then. I don't feel quite so much a noob at the moment.
No, I mean, I think regardless of your knowledge of the source material, this is still a very different Final Fantasy VII. So I think in many respects we're still coming at this thing all on the same page. It's only the narrative stuff that I think separates a lot of people here. Especially if, like in your case, you're coming in with that Final Fantasy 15 background. Some people might be coming at it with Kingdom Hearts 3. I feel sorry for them. But they're going to come in with a degree of experience of games that are somewhat adjacent to this anyway, even if they're not exactly there and they don't have that that narrative background, that's fine.
Give it 3 months, and there will be min-maxing materia guides and best strategies for every single encounter in this game because of what they've done with the materia system for one. But that's just the fact of the matter that I've smashed this thing out in 6 days. It's not necessarily the most conducive way to play a game and completely familiarize yourself with the ins and outs of the entire battle system. And I was running off a lot of my memories of how materia worked in the original game.
Yeah, and you do need to break that down a little bit.
Oh, as in the changes that they've made?
Yeah, like you've got this memory, as you spoke about, and you can draw on that, and that's great if you're going to go back to the original Final Fantasy VII, but you're not.
Yeah. Well,
and so having to break some of your own rules and play things a little bit differently, it's something that I've struggled with a little bit as well, and that's fine. Again, that's one of the great things about remaking the game is they can do a few things differently, but I'm still falling into the trap a little bit.
Yeah. And again, with the limitations they've placed on materia, meaning that there is basically a finite amount of them in the game world. You can only buy so many of them. You can find so many of them in the world, and you can't max out their AP and have it birth another materia anymore.
Yeah, that hurts a little bit. I discovered that one the hard way. Chris, are you familiar with what we just discussed there?
No, but I'll keep it in mind.
Go on, Stephen, explain.
I'll explain it. So basically, in the original Final Fantasy VII, the same way that you can level up your character, your materia levels up after battles. And you've probably noticed that in terms of new and more powerful spells unlocking in your green materia or higher percentage increases in purple and yellow materia and things like that. What would happen when you max out the AP of a materia is it would then burn a base level materia of that materia. So, for example, if you maxed out your lightning materia, you would then find a shiny new baby lightning materia in your inventory ready to suffer the same fate. Now, this was exploited greatly to come up with some brilliant strategies at defeating some of the most heinous enemies throughout Final Fantasy VII. Most notably, probably the Knights of the Round summon and maxing that out to get a few of those happening, which notoriously the most difficult to get summon materia in the game in terms of the amount of steps required to reach it, but also the amount of damage it. So if you could spam multiple Knights of the Round summons and then do all these other crazy things with Mime and Reflect, you could basically set it up to take out the most difficult enemy of the game in a handful of turns with a few little materia tricks, which cannot be done in this version, at least at this point. I'm sure some genius out there is going to tinker with these systems and come up with some crazy combinations that ultimately destroy enemies very quickly in this, but I think for a lot of people coming in, you will quickly familiarize yourself. You're like, okay, all these metal enemies, I should strap a lightning materia on and make that my elemental attack. Oh, most other enemies are pretty weak to fire. They do throw in the odd ice and wind weakness on particular enemies, but in the original game, most of those started to appear outside of Midgar. I remember spending a lot of time just with fire and thunder materia in Mid.
Yeah, and it didn't really matter too much. You could just wail on them with whatever, and you were fine. You could just brute force your way through it if you wanted to. Hell, you didn't even have to go with materia. You could just
you could grind.
Yeah.
You can't grind in this one to a certain degree.
Did you end up, because I, picking through the trophies, as I do, because I'm a dirty trophy whore, I did see that there was the trophy for hitting level 50. Did you get even remotely close to that?
35. I finished the game at level 35.
Holy shit. Okay. So there must be, again, I'm not nearly as far as you, but there must be a bunch of ways to be able to level up beyond that, or some degree of level grinding. Is that a bit...
chapter select, so you can take your characters through it. When you finish the game, it gives you a chapter select option to go back through and mop up any collectibles you missed.
Okay. Oh, geez. Okay, I'm eyeing off that platinum trophy now. Oh, I got to play it on hard though.
Yeah, that's not anything I wish to do anytime soon.
No,
I'll wait till again those materia battle strategies guides come out and it tells me step by step what I need to do to smash every boss before I have a crack at that.
Look, we'll just wait for Lance to crack the game. It'll inevitably be Lance. He'll break into the game. He'll be the one that gives us all these little guides and tricks and tips on how to do it, because he would have dived into the back end and picked the game clean like he does with Bloodborne and everything like that. So
give us a nice debug camera mode, where
Yeah,
sort of,
100%.
little photo mode as well to play with. So
watches the giant scorpions flipping you off as it's falling to its death. You remember that one that he found from God of War?
goodness me, no, Lance does some very impressive stuff.
Can't wait to get up close to some of those really low-res PNGs that they use as skyboxes.
Oh yeah, there's a few. Chris, you mentioned it before. You were talking about like the attention to detail and a few different like with some of the characters and whatnot. But then there's other areas, and you're in the slums at the moment. Have you gone to? And this is not really spoilerish for anyone watching or listening. Cloud's little, I don't know, hotel room, the room he stays in, his little apartment. Yet?
Yes, yeah, I have.
Did you notice the door?
I did, yeah. I did notice that there are some backgrounds and some textures. It like there was some
really
issues
low res
or something like that. But
the pop-in or super low res.
Yeah, I thought you were going to tell me, they totally stacked the front end of the game with these gorgeous visuals, and it turns to crap halfway through.
Stephen can talk to that. In terms of the big stuff, no, it looks fantastic. I think it's the smaller details
throughout. There are particular areas where it's really noticeable. But again, I think it's mostly the slum areas, to be honest. The later parts of the game, especially some of the later dungeons, are all pretty solid.
Okay, good. Now, outside of the main mission, there's obviously the side quests. Stephen, you'll be able to speak to this a little bit. Chris, you're just starting to dip your toes in them. But actually, we'll start with you, Chris, because I know what your stance is, Stephen. I've not minded them so far. I've done as many side quests as you've probably got available to you. There's only the core 6 up to where I'm up to. I think, to your point before, Stephen, Chapter 8 is when I get a new round of them, when I deal with Aerith and all that at that point. But, Chris, at this point, you and I have done the same number of side quests. What have you made of them so far?
Yeah, I think they haven't totally blown me away, but I have been doing them for the sake of any particular bonuses they give me or any leveling and that sort of thing. Some of the side quests that I've done have been the fella who gets you to assess different enemies, and he works on
Chadley.
Yeah, Chadley, that's who it was. Yeah,
I was so taken with him and his name that I named my Animal Crossing town after him.
Nice, Chadley. Yeah, so I did. I've done some of those quests, and I've been asked to sort of do some side quests dealing with what would be considered like vermin enemies and that sort of thing.
Yep.
So far it's been pretty standard early game RPG, even bordering on sort of early MMO sort of stuff. Pretty straightforward. Nothing terribly exciting, but it hasn't quite got to the point where I'm like, oh god, I'm just going to mainline from here on. So I haven't encountered anything outstanding, but nothing that sort of made me want to, throw my PlayStation out the window or anything.
Stephen, go on, because I know you got plenty of thoughts on side quests.
Rubbish. They're all rubbish. They're straight up garbage. They're just pathetic fetch quests or combat encounters, or a fetch quest tied to a combat encounter. I mean, there's so little reward to doing them. It is really where this thing falls flat, and it's another part of it that really hampers the pacing, I think, which is inevitable when you're stretching out a 5 to 10 hour section of a game into a 30+ hour section. But it's so goddamn cliche, but in a post Witcher 3 world,
it doesn't stack up.
You need to do better. Like, just do better. Like, that's the best you could come up with.
Yeah, I can feel you there.
Yeah, I felt they kind of detracted. The only benefit to doing any of them is it does give you some nice story encounters. Like, there's an encounter you can only get with Tifa if you complete all the side quests.
Okay. More reason for me to do it. I'll stick at it then.
Well, in that section. So there's, again, 3 chapters with side quests. If you do all of the chapter 3 side quests, that's when you get a little bonus encounter.
Oh, yeah, okay. So, yeah, I've done that then. Yeah, cool. But that said, to do all those ones in chapter 3, you do, and Chris, I don't know if you've done this yet, have to deal with the cat fetch quest thing.
No, I haven't done that yet.
Oh, man. Finding those cats was a nightmare for starters. Only for them to run away and the kid would be, oh, that's okay, no worry, like, whatever, and then they just show up. Like, fucking serious? Nearly threw my controller through a window at that point.
This is where I'm like looking at some of these reviews where it's like, flat 10 out of 10, and I'm like, really? Like, even the fetch questy garbage? Like, that's new. That's, that wasn't in the original game. It's something that's actively worse.
Yeah. Yeah, there's a few decisions that have been made or inclusions that are fantastic, and I think most of them relate to the big picture narrative. Things like the extra interactions between Biggs, Wedge, and Jesse, and I'm not so sure about Roche, but in fact he gives me the shits, that arrogant little douchebag. Punch him.
That was a weird addition.
I've only dealt with him. There was the bike sequence, and Chris, I'm avoiding specific details here. There's a bike sequence, and then there's an encounter with him afterwards. That's the extent of my time with him so far, and I'd be very happy to not have to deal with him again. But my gut says he'll be back because he's that sort of character.
So is he a new character to the remake?
Yep.
Yeah, right.
Unless, and Steve, maybe you can confirm. I don't recall him being present at all in the original.
No, he wasn't. But then again, I don't think that bike sequence to Jesse's house and any of that event was there. That's just, again, them enriching the story. And I think that's probably
Those
due
things
to
are
the fact
fantastic,
that,
though.
yeah, I think that's more down to the fact that they had to build this whole section of the game for the bike sequence toward the end of the game that's, very well known. And they probably thought, why don't we get a bit more use out of this? And there does seem to be a lot of that doubling and tripling up, backtracking in later chapters to do things in previous areas, which obviously is going to pad out the length.
Yeah, righto. I'm a bit torn on some of those. Yeah, I mean, like I can see when it comes to the bike one, and I don't know what else there might be. When it comes to the bike one, I'm kind of okay with it to an extent. That, like, if they do it once, maybe twice before the big key iconic one, they're giving you a tutorial essentially.
That's what it does come off as feeling like, and I think it's going to be really beneficial for new players to not have, because if you think back to the original Final Fantasy, that thing was borderline schizophrenic when it came to minigame. Like, the amount of weird ass minigames they put in there that you would do once and then never touch again. Like, again, it's just not something that a studio would do today. There's just so much work that goes into making that stuff these days that why would you use it? You can't justify just using it once.
And that's where Gwent became the biggest thing in the world, because it main game there, and then all of a sudden became its own product. It was awesome. So,
yeah, it's actually one thing I wouldn't mind touching with sort of the quests and especially the side quests is and sort of doing a little bit of a plug for the coverage I've been doing for Player 2 for Final Fantasy XIV, the online MMO, good. Which I've just been touching on for the first time. And as you'd expect with the MMOs, there are a bunch of fetch quests and sort of a lot of those vanilla, for lack of a better word, vanilla combat encounters. But a lot of that is a lot of the sort of monotony of that is diminished somewhat by the sheer fact that you can do it with other people when there's the multiplayer aspect, the social aspect, so you can do some of these more grindy or sort of laid back quests and that sort of stuff while socializing with others, or even the writing and the work the localization team has done for 14 is fantastic. There's so much charm out of even the most basic of side quests that you almost start seeking them out for just some of these little charming vignettes that present themselves. But especially from what you're saying, Stephen, that a lot of these side quests here in the remake of 7, there's no way to lessen the impact of them by multiplayer. But it sounds like so. Reading between the lines, would you say to someone like myself who is relatively early game in the remake, would you just say just focus on the main line, or would I need to do some of the side quests for leveling purposes, or what would you say to someone who's pretty early on or is about to jump in?
It's tough because, again, there are gameplay rewards tied to some of those quests and light story rewards, but if you are really digging the narrative and you want to keep that breakneck speed going, you can go back and do them all in the chapter select if that's a route you would like to take. So, again, it's really up to you. If you if you think it's giving you a nice little break and you can mosey around town for a bit and do a few good deeds for people, then go for it. But if you are really wanting to hammer through to that next story sequence and you don't think you particularly need any extra assistance with battles, then again, you could probably pass them up and go back and do them later once you've rolled credits.
Okay, would you say, hypothetically, if I were to just main quests, would I encounter battles later on that I'd think, oh geez, I wish I did some more leveling? Or do you find it's yeah.
It really depends. If you're playing on normal, depending on how confident you are in the battle system, I'd say that it's a little bit uneven. There were some bosses I had way more trouble with than others, like early game bosses that were way more difficult than late game bosses. And that can partially be down to experience with the battling system, better weapons. You know, are doing more effective unlocks on those weapons, but also, yeah, it'd be hard without having a list of what specific rewards you get from those side quests.
Yeah.
But I think the fact that you can max out at level 50 in this game does mean that I found that even a single level felt different in the combat. Like, I noticed my characters feeling
the extra bump to your stats.
Yeah. And obviously that ties in with the extra bump to your weapons, because weapons have experience points too in this game now, and you unlock skills and, you know, better stats for them through leveling.
Were you a fan of that? Of that aspect, the skill points for the weapons?
I am, only because it makes some of those early game weapons still viable. Like, there are times, like, the bottom weapon on your list isn't necessarily the best weapon for a given situation, or the best weapon flat out. I found myself floating between a few of the earlier weapons, even late game. And I think just for that fact alone, that there is only about 8 weapons per character, that even the Buster Sword can still hold its own to some degree in the final areas of the game, is quite nice, because obviously they're all lovingly rendered. You get to see the individual materia slotted into them.
Yeah.
And it's always a shame when, you know, so many weapons and armor sets and things, like the armor's trash. You got to toss that stuff away as soon as you get the better stuff. But the weapons, at least, it is nice to not just, you know, do the sentimental thing and you keep the first weapon and sell everything else, or, you know, it just gets relegated to the item bag once a shinier weapon comes along.
Yeah, that's fair. I mean, any opportunity to see that Buster Sword hanging off Cloud's back, I think, as far as I'm concerned. So the fact that it can still be a viable option towards the back end of the game is a good thing, as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah,
that's what I was curious about, is that have they implemented this system so people can carry around the Buster Sword for the entire game?
Yeah, you could.
There's probably a little temptation from Square in the background. Let's stick that thing there. We want it in their face all the time. Remind them how cool it is.
Well, again, it's iconic. You know, that the poster of Cloud looking up at the reactor that was everywhere in 1997 is, you know, that's why they reused that shot for the remake. It's iconic, and that sword is, for better or worse, an iconic part of Final Fantasy VII.
There's definitely no worse aspect to it as far as I'm concerned. But any opportunity, it's a cool sword, and the story behind it's cool. Everything from Crisis Core related to it's cool. Yep, managed to plug that again.
Again with the Crisis Core.
Yeah, it's not even, and that's not even the best Final Fantasy. Like, don't give me an opportunity to start talking about 9. But any other thoughts? Anything else from the game at all that either of you are still looking to discuss? The summons, Chris, I don't think you've unlocked a summon yet.
Not yet, no.
Stephen, what do you think about them?
They look fantastic.
Oh, that's a Final Fantasy thing.
And it is nicer to have them more akin to an AI-controlled guest character rather than just a single use big hitting attack. Because I think we forget that the reason people love the summons was because that was where a lot of the highest level of graphical fidelity in Final Fantasy VII came from. Those particular attack animations.
Yeah, for
Albeit, by the end of the game, you were so goddamn sick of seeing them, but they were unskippable. And you probably might not be aware of this, Chris, but you could spam them. You could use summon materia over and over again, provided you had the MP. Whereas in Remake, characters can only equip a single summon materia. Again, they cannot be actually birthed from maxing them out. So once you've got one summon materia, that's it. That's the only version of that you.
Well, they come maxed out.
Yeah, but
So
they also cannot be used in every battle. They're very limited, and generally what I've noticed is it's relegated to usually the second and third stage of a boss fight is when you can bust out a summon materia.
So don't rely on it too heavily. And pay attention to it as well, because it's one of those things that's kind of cheekily stuck on the side of the materia screen there. So you've got your normal materia, and then just to the right of that's where the summon can get slotted once you've actually unlocked Ifrit as your first one. I went over to my folks' place yesterday to sort out a few grocery bits and pieces for them, because you can't stick around there too long at the moment. But my sister was playing the remake at the time, and she's hardcore Final Fantasy VII. She was one of those that came on years and years after the fact, but just thinks that she knows it back to where the hipsters of Final Fantasy VII. You get out of here, you just go back to you.
Are you gatekeeping your own sister?
100%, any day of the week. That family dynamic for you. But she's sitting there playing, and she's been so desperate to just smash through this thing. She was so eager that she didn't even know. Like, she's like, I said, "Have you got your summons yet?" And she didn't even realize. She did, because we're used to getting games early. She didn't know about how to view the trophies and those sort of things. I pointed that out to her, and like, you haven't got the one for using a summon yet. She goes, "No, how do you do that?" And I go, "What are you doing?" She was chapter 13 or 14 at the time, quite probably done by now. But she was that far into the game and hadn't used a summon at all, and it's because she was just smashing through, like, ignoring the dialogue. I know Final Fantasy VII. I'm gonna go for it, and they've made that subtle little tweak there about how summons are used and whatnot that she hadn't used Ifrit, or God knows who else she had at that particular point in time, as well. So, just listeners, viewers, keep your eye out for it, because it's not obvious, and they don't make a huge deal about it. But make sure to equip it.
Oh, yeah, I'll have to make a note to do that. But I'd say for me, there's probably two things I'd want to finish on with regards to sort of my experience so far of the remake and what I'm sort of looking forward to / expecting or hoping for. So firstly, I'm very very keen to see sort of where the plot goes, and also the what the deal is with this Aerith woman. What are these strange spectral sort of things that you come across and all that sort of stuff? Because as I've said, I have know through the sheer thing of just existing in the gaming world that something happens, but I've got no idea about the blanks in between. So I'm very, very fascinated to see sort of where things go as far as that goes, and what sort of relationship you, or rather Cloud, has with Aerith. So
to be fair, those spectral things, they surprised me too. I had no idea what was going on. So
okay, so that's a new thing, I take it. But
unless my memory's dodgy,
I
think it's a new thing.
Yeah, well, so the relationship with Aerith, and sort of the role that she plays, because obviously from all I've seen is she's a mysterious flower peddler. So I'm interested to see sort of how she forms a significant component of the game and the narrative. The other thing is, I'm hoping that through a little bit of practice and a little bit more time, that the combat gels with me a little bit more, because I found that even early on, even in the initial reactor mission, that I felt like just small sort of intangible things, such as taking damage in combat. I felt that there was a lack of tangible impacts or feedback when you took damage, because I thought I was breezing through some of these early battles, and all of a sudden I'm running from one encounter to the next and running through this reactor facility, and all of a sudden I look down and realize, holy crap, Cloud's only got 200 HP left, because I didn't realize.
It does get lost a bit.
Yeah, because I didn't realize sort of in the mix of doing the real-time combat, flicking between some of the tactical battle mode, and unleashing some abilities and that sort of stuff, that during that time I had steadily been taking combat, and there were I could see I was taking 24 bits of damage at a time, but there wasn't much in the way of sort of feedback or rumble or something to sort of suggest that, hey, you're actually taking a fair bit of damage here. So that was something that was a bit of a shock to me, sort of trying to keep an eye on that, because going back to playing Kingdom Hearts, and I think Final Fantasy 15, I do remember that when you took a substantial amount of damage, or when you entered sort of that red zone, that you certainly knew about it. The game would let you know about it, whereas here it sort of felt a little bit sneaky. But it feels like a relatively minor thing, but it's sort of, to me, it feels like it's sort of that lost ground, or that sort of slipping through the cracks of sort of the action and RPG components of the game coming together, that just didn't quite feel properly coalesced, so to speak.
Yeah, I'm with you. Stephen, any closing thoughts about the game at all? Obviously, you know where it ends, so feel free not to tempt us too much with spoiler-related bits and pieces. But
you were teasing us off air.
where are we? What are you looking for as we head into an inevitable part 2 and 3 and 4 and 16 and God knows how many? What are you looking for out of the next part, presumably in, say, 2022?
I'm really looking forward to everyone having finished this game so we can actually talk about what is going to happen for part 2.
Maybe I'll need to call you both together again in a few weeks. Spoiler cast.
I imagine I'm going to get an all caps text from you the minute you finish this game, to be quite honest.
Okay, right.
Expect the unexpected is all I'm going to say.
And that extends to part 2 then, I assume, based on that?
I think I pointed it out, and again, I hope that people get some of the things that I put into my review that will make a bit more sense if it's revisited after you finish the game.
Yep. Just choice words.
Yeah.
Oh. Again,
no spoilers, and I don't want to do that thing where I try to dance around spoilers, and inevitably you're intelligent enough to connect the dots, and I come off like a tool, so we'll just leave it at that.
I mean, for me, pretty simply, without having the narrative aspect that we've just been discussing, there is still the side quests and the gameplay and those sort of things that we've been discussing that I'd love to see a bit more refinement there. I'd like to see some AI that is actually contributing to a scenario as opposed to being maybe a drawback in some ways. I'd like to see just these systems fleshed out and improved and tweaked. The side quests give us something meaningful to do rather than chasing cats for no good reason.
One thing that I suspect is going to happen is that in a year's time, when the Xbox Series X, presumably version, launches, maybe there's some extra stuff in there, maybe there's some refinements, maybe there's some enhancements, and maybe then we get a big old PS4 patch to bring us up to speed with that version, because a year is a really long time to have a product sit there with no further additions to it.
To be fair, they don't necessarily need to make any additions to it. They still have, regardless of some of its faults, they have still packed this thing pretty densely with stuff. They've turned, as we've discussed, probably 8 to 10 hour sequence from a 40, 50 hour game into a 30 hour experience on its own. So they've done a fair bit with it. And I'm obviously really curious to see what will happen when we're out of Midgar and from the original Final Fantasy VII, the open world actually emerges. Like, are we going to get that open world? Are we going to get some bastardization of that? Is it going to be still ultra linear and the whole open world is just removed completely? I'm really curious to see how that all plays out. And then obviously the iconic moment from Final Fantasy VII, I can't help but wonder what's going to happen with that. I'm not one of those, and Stephen again say absolutely nothing in case there's anything they tease or tempt in any way, shape or form. I hope they don't change it. That's my one big thing, is I hope they don't change that. I don't want them to switch it up, and I think that's protect the core narrative. Good, Stephen saying nothing.
I'm just going to say nothing.
Very well behaved.
I think I'm in a similar boat to you, Paul. From the perspective of more so, I just want to sort of experience this core narrative that has been such an important part of so many players' lives for so many years, and I'm looking forward to sort of finally actually experiencing and having the gaps filled in on this mythology of a game that has seemingly stood the test of time. So, and I'm also keen to see what the deal with Sephiroth is, because to me, he's just a big bad boss that I fought in an optional thing in Kingdom Hearts. So he looks really cool. He's got a big long ass sword. So he's got this real air of mystery to me. So I've got no idea what his deal is, other than he's got a cool sword. So I'll supposedly find out.
Can't wait for you to
eventually.
discover all that.
Yeah. So I'll find out soon enough, no doubt.
Looking forward to hearing about it.
15 or so chapters to go, and you'll be right up there with the rest of us, generally. The weirdest thing is, like, everything I remember about Final Fantasy VII, most of it is after Midgar.
Yeah. There's obviously, things like the bike, and there's a few key moments, but everything else is, basically outside of Midgar, so... It is an interesting one. It's might be a drawback for some when it comes to this remake, the fact that we're not getting that component. So we'll see. As we wrap things up, plugs from the both of you. Prado and Damo do patched and patched only, so I don't usually have to deal with that with them. But the two of you are contributing some stuff to the website and elsewhere as well. So maybe talk a little bit about, Chris, you can get the ball rolling there. Spruik your wares.
Yeah, so lately I think most of my stuff has been Player 2, but I also co-host a podcast about the Apple Arcade service, the gaming subscription service on iOS and Mac and that sort of stuff. So that's the Mobile Arcade Club. Other than that, if you just want to suss out what I do, following me on Twitter is probably the best way to see what I get up to, and that's at BibbyBoy, BIBBYBHOY.
Directly under his name, under his picture right now, if you're watching the YouTube version. Stephen, how about you?
You can read my Player 2 Final Fantasy VII Remake review. It's also on Metacritic. They judged my B+ to be an 83. So hopefully that's high enough to not put me in the shit list of a lot of Final Fantasy VII fans.
Look, I did see that EGM gave it a 60, so you're safe, mate.
Yeah, I mean... Hit me up on Twitter if you want to talk about that ending.
Just keep it low key so the rest of us don't see it, all right?
Yeah, just DM him. Don't tweet him publicly.
Yeah. And for myself, look, I had a little sticky note full of things that I've got to do this week. Some of those things will be up. Some of those I can talk about. Some of those I can't, so I'm just not going to talk about any of them. Visit the website player2.net.au for reviews, previews, opinions, news, features, etc., etc. Heaps of awesome stuff there from these guys and a whole bunch of other awesome people as well. There's some dude called Matt Houston that runs it. Bit of a shit show, actually. The YouTube channel, just make sure to like, share, and subscribe to that so you can get more episodes of Patched, as well as The Insider, Player 2 Plays. I've probably got to stop talking about The Insider. I haven't done one of those in 6 to 8 weeks now, so maybe it'll come back, maybe it won't. And a whole bunch more. Subscribe, go check it out so they all pop up. We did have a Player 2 Plays dedicated to Final Fantasy VII that went up alongside of Stephen's review, so if the written word that he's put together is not enough for you on its own, then you can go check out some video stuff for the game as well.
Which, come on, it's like 2,000 words. It's probably the longest review I've put together for the site ever. So
if that's not enough for you, there is more, but it should quench your appetite. Go check out the video too. Even if you just hit play and just let it play out, like just walk off, go get a coffee, I don't know. We're on Patreon, patreon.com/player2au, kicking a few bucks. At the lower tiers, early access to episodes. At the higher tiers, monthly episode exclusives. And we've already done the Twitter handles, so you two mentioned yours. For me, it's Paul James Games. The website's player2au. Boys, thanks a lot for coming on to talk about Final Fantasy VII today.
Thanks for having us.
And
Thank
Square,
you. It's been fun.
Square, can you do Final Fantasy IX and just not tweak it much at all? Just give me a glow up of Final Fantasy IX and I'll be very, very happy. Otherwise, thanks a lot for watching. See you later.
Bye.